right, guys, here we are. We are with the last 5 sections of holes. So we are at chapter 40, page 177. Move my sticky, and we're good. All right, chapter 40, page 177. When Stanley found the onion the night before, he didn't question how it'd come to be there. He ate it gratefully. But now, as he sat gazing at Big Thumb in the meadow full of flowers, he couldn't help but wonder about it. If there was one wild onion, there could be more. He intertwined his fingers and tried to rub out the pain. Then he bent down and dug up another flower, this time pulling up the entire plant, including the root. All right, so now we're going to go back in time to Sam. "Onions! Fresh, hot, sweet onions!" Sam called as Mary Lou pulled the cart down Main Street. 8 cents a dozen. It was a beautiful spring morning, and the sky was painted pale blue and pink, the same color as the lake and the peach trees along its shore. Miss Gladys Tennyson was wearing her nightgown and robe as she came running through the street after Sam. Miss Tennyson was normally a very proper woman who never went out in public without dressing up in fine clothes and a hat. So it was quite surprising to the people of Green Lake to see her running past them. "Sam!" she shouted. "Whoa, Mary Lou," said Sam, stopping his mule and cart. "Good morning, Miss Tyson," he says. "How's little Becca doing?" Gladys Tennyson was all smiles. "I think she's going to be all right. The fever broke about an hour ago, thanks to you." "I'm sure the good Lord and Doc Hawthorne deserve most of the credit. "The good Lord, yes," agreed Miss Tennyson, "but not Dr. Hawthorne. That quack wanted to put leeches on her stomach. Leeches! Leeches are a type of, bug animal thing. They're, this big, and they suck onto you, and they suck your blood out. Yeah. So back in the day, they thought that putting those on people's bodies would, suck the disease out. But it didn't at all. It just made people sicker. Anyway, "Leeches, my word," he said. "They would suck out the bad blood. Now you tell me, how would a leech know good blood from bad blood?" "I wouldn't know," said Sam. "It was your onion tonic," said Miss Tennyson. "That's what saved her." The other townspeople made their way to the cart. "Good morning, Gladys," I can't read. "Good morning, Gladys," said Hattie Parker. Don't you look lovely this morning?" And several people snickered. They laughed. "Good morning, Hattie," said Miss Tennyson replied. God, I can't read. Miss Tennyson replied. "Does your husband know you're parading out in your bedclothes?" Hattie asked. There were more snickers. "My husband knows exactly where I am and how I am dressed, thank you," said Miss Tennyson. "We have both been up all night and half the morning with Rebecca. She's almost died from stomach sickness. It seems she ate some bad meat." Hattie's face flushed. Her husband, Jim Parker, was the butcher, meaning he gave them the meat. "It made my husband and me sick as well," said Miss Tennyson, "but it nearly killed Becca. What with her being so young, Sam saved her life." "It wasn't me," said Sam. "It was the onions." "I'm glad Becca's all right," Hattie said, contritely, like she was whatever. "I keep telling Jim he needs to watch his knives," said Mr. Pike, who owned the general store. Hattie Parker excused herself, then turned quickly and walked away. "Tell Becca that when she feels up to it to come by the store for a piece of candy," said Mr. Pike. "Thank you, I'll do that." Before returning home, Mrs. Tennyson bought a dozen onions from Sam. She gave them a dime and told him to keep the change. "I don't take charity," Sam told her, "but if you want to buy a few extra onions for Mary Lou, I'm sure she'd appreciate it." "All right then," said Miss Tennyson. "Give my change in onions." Sam gave Miss Tennyson an additional 3 onions, and she fed them one at a time to Mary Lou. She laughed as the old donkey ate them out of her hand. Back to Stanley. Stanley and Zero slept off and on for the next 2 days and ate onions, all they wanted, and splashed dirty water into their mouths. In the late afternoon, Big Thumb gave them shade. Stanley tried to make the hole deeper, but he really needed the shovel. His efforts seemed to stir up the mud and make the water dirtier. Zero was sleeping. He was still very sick and weak, but the sleep and the onions seemed to be doing him some good. Stanley was no longer afraid that he would die soon. Still, he didn't want to go for the shovel while Zero was asleep. He didn't want him to wake up and think he'd been deserted. He waited for Zero to open his eyes. "I think I'll go look for the shovel," Stanley said. "I'll wait here," Zero said feebly, as if he had any other choice. Stanley headed down the mountain. The sleep and the onions had done him a lot of good as well. He felt strong. It was fairly easy to follow the trail he had made 2 days earlier. There were a few places where he wasn't sure he was going the right way, but it just took a little bit of searching before he found the trail again. He went quite a ways down the mountain, but still didn't find the shovel. He looked back up toward the top of the mountain. He must have walked right past it, he thought. There was no way he could have carried Zero all the way up from here. Still, he headed downward just in case. He came to a bare spot between 2 large patches of weeds and sat down to rest. Now he had definitely gone too far, he decided. He was tired from walking down the hill, and it would have been impossible to have carried Zero up the hill from here, especially after walking all day with no food or water. The shovel must be buried somewhere in the weeds. Before starting back up, he took one last look around in all directions. He saw a large indentation in the weeds a little farther down the mountain. It didn't seem likely that the shovel could be there, but he'd already come this far. There, lying in some tall weeds, he found the shovel and the sack of jars. He was amazed. He wondered if the shovel and sack might have rolled down the hill, but none of the jars were broken, except the one which had broken earlier. And if they had rolled down the hill, it's doubtful that they would have found the sack and shovel by side. On his way back up the mountain, Stanley had to sit down and rest several times. It was a long, hard climb. All right, so he's realizing that, man, he carried Zero really far up the hill. Chapter 41, page 182. Zero's condition continued to improve. Stanley slowly peeled an onion. He liked eating them one layer at a time. The watering hole was now almost as large as the holes we had dug back at Camp Green Lake. It contained almost 2 feet of murky water. Stanley had dug it all by himself. Zero had offered to help, but Stanley thought it better for Zero to save his strength. It was a lot harder to dig in water than it was in a dry lake. Stanley was surprised that he himself had not gotten sick, either from the sploosh, the dirty water, or from living on onions. He used to get sick quite a lot back home. Both boys were barefoot. They had washed their socks. All their clothes were very dirty, but their socks were definitely the worst. They didn't dip their socks in the hole, afraid to contaminate the water. Instead, they filled the jars and poured the water over the dirty socks. "I didn't go to the homeless shelter very often," Zero said. "Just if the weather was really bad, I'd have to find someone to pretend to be my mom. If I'd just gone by myself, they would have asked me a bunch of questions. If they found out I didn't have a mom, they would have made me a ward of the state." "What's the ward of the state?" Zero smiled. "I don't know, but it didn't sound like I didn't like the sound of it." Stanley remembered Mr. Pendanski telling the warden that Zero was a ward of the state, and he wondered if Zero knew he'd become one. "I liked sleeping outside," Zero said. "I used to pretend I was a Cub Scout. I always wanted to be a Cub Scout. I'd see them in the park in their blue uniforms." "I was never a Cub Scout," said Stanley. "I wasn't good at social stuff like that. Kids made fun of me because I was fat." "I like the blue uniforms." "I like the blue uniforms," said Zero. "Maybe I wouldn't have liked being a Cub Scout." Stanley shrugged one shoulder. "My mother was once a Girl Scout," said Zero. "I thought you said you didn't have a mother." "Well, everybody has to have a mother." Yeah, I know that." "She said she once won a prize for selling the most Girl Scout cookies," said Zero. She was really proud of that. Stanley peeled off another layer of his onion. "We always took what we needed," Zero said. "When I was little, I didn't even know it was stealing. I don't remember when I found out, but we just took what we needed, never more. So when I saw those shoes on display at the shelter, I just reached in the glass case and took them." "Clyde Livingston's shoes?" asked Stanley. "And why does Stanley care about that?" "Right, because that's what he got accused of stealing, and that's why he's at Camp Green Lake." "I didn't know they were his. I just thought they were somebody's old shoes." "It was better to take someone's old shoes, I thought, than to steal a pair of new ones. I didn't know they were famous. There was a sign, but of course I couldn't read it." Then the next thing I know, everybody's making this big deal about how the shoes are missing. It was kind of funny in a way. The whole place was going crazy. And there I was wearing the shoes. And everybody's running around saying, "What happened to the shoes? The shoes are gone." I just walked out the door. No one noticed me. When I got outside, I ran around the corner and immediately took off the shoes and put them on top of a parked car. As I remembered, they smelled really bad. "Yeah, those were them," said Stanley. "Did they fit you?" "Pretty much." Stanley remembered being surprised at Clyde Livingston's small shoe size. Stanley's shoes were bigger, and Clyde Livingston had small, quick feet. Stanley's feet were big and slow. "I should have just kept them," said Zero. "I had already made it out of the shelter and everything. I ended up getting arrested the next day when I tried to walk out of the shoe store with a new pair of sneakers. If I had just kept those old smelly sneakers, neither one of us would be here right now." All right, I want you to think about that. Right? If Zero hadn't given up the old sneakers and stolen the new ones, right? Would they both be there right now? I don't know. You'll have to find out later. All right, log on to Teams and check to see if you have any summaries to do, please. All right, bye, guys.